Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the Senate kicks off the confirmation process of President-elect Trump's nominees. Pete Hegseth, Trump's pick for defense secretary, faced questions from senators of the Armed Services Committee today. Luis Martinez is on Capitol Hill with the key takeaways. An external revenue service. That's what Trump is vowing to create once he's sworn in next week. What the new agency will collect, and could it help lower taxes for Americans? Iris Tao in West Palm Beach. As the Eaton fire devastates California's Altadena area, a community comes together in the face of tragedy. Full donations pour in. Hundreds of volunteers work tirelessly to clear debris and honor the victims with a heartfelt tribute. Christina Corona has the latest from Los Angeles. The Houthi terrorist group in Yemen launched more missiles at Israel, forcing residents to seek shelter. Meanwhile, families of hostages share details of the ceasefire proposal. Jason Perry reports. A possible meeting between President-elect Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin. Arian Pasdar has what the Kremlin says about the second Trump presidency.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The Senate has started the confirmation process for President-elect Trump's cabinet nominees. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has details on the hearing on Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth.
Republican chairman of the Senate's Armed Services Committee, Senator Roger Wicker, began the confirmation hearing by acknowledging that Peter Hegseth is an unconventional candidate.
Admittedly, this nomination is unconventional. The nominee is unconventional, just like that New York developer who rode down the escalator in 2015 to announce his candidacy for president.
Democratic ranking member Senator Jack Reed immediately announced that he opposes the confirmation of Peter Hegseth as Secretary of Defense.
Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of this job. We must acknowledge the concerning public reports against you. A variety of sources, including your own writings, implicate you with disregarding the laws of war.
During his opening remarks, Peter Hegseth shared the mission that President-elect Donald Trump gave him when he nominated him for Secretary of Defense.
To bring back warfighting, if confirmed, I'm going to work with President Trump and this committee to, one, restore the warrior ethos to the Pentagon and throughout our fighting force. In doing so, we will reestablish trust in our military, addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Democratic senators noted with displeasure that Peter Hegseth refused to meet with any of them before the confirmation hearing, and were also highly critical of past comments by Peter Hegseth on the role of women in combat.
If on the one hand, you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective, and on the other hand, you say, oh no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military.
You will have to change how you see women to do this job well, and I don't know if you are capable of that. We have hundreds of women who are currently in the infantry, lethal members of our military serving in the infantry. But
Peter Hegseth is the first nominee of President-elect Donald Trump to have his confirmation hearing on Tuesday. Two other confirmation hearings were scheduled, that of Doug Burgum for Secretary of Interior and of Doug Collins for Veteran Affairs Secretary. Both were postponed due to a lack of a complete report by the FBI on their background. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
In another show of determination to rely on tariffs to keep the country afloat, President-elect Trump announces he'll create a parallel with the Internal Revenue Service called the External Revenue Service. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more on Trump's plans.
And President-elect Trump says on day one of his imminent new term, he will create an external revenue service to collect tariffs, duties, and all revenue from foreign sources. In a Tuesday post, Trump says, for far too long, we have relied on taxing our great people using the Internal Revenue Service. We'll begin charging those that make money off of us with trade, and they will start paying finally their fair share. Trump has vowed to raise tariffs on countries like Canada, Mexico, and China if they refuse to help stop the flow of illegal immigrants and fentanyl into the U.S.
And the drugs that are coming through are at record numbers. So we're going to make up for that by putting tariffs on Mexico and Canada, substantial tariffs.
Trump has also floated the idea of ending the federal income tax, harking back to the late 19th century when the U.S. relied on tariffs to fund federal spending.
Tariffs will make our country rich. But won't they raise prices? Properly used.
Meanwhile, questions remain over how exactly will Trump create that new external revenue service. It could just involve renaming an existing office within the Treasury Department, or it could need congressional help with establishing something new. Meanwhile, in legal news, the Justice Department on early Tuesday morning released Special Counsel Jack Smith's report on a 2020 election case against Trump. While most of it repeats what has been previously laid out, the report says that Trump would get convicted if he hadn't won the election. And Trump has been pushing back against the release of the report, saying it hurts the institution of the presidency. And for now, the Justice Department is barred from releasing the second part of the report about the classified documents case. Reporting from West Palm Beach, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And what's in Volume 1 of Jack Smith's investigative report on Trump, and what does it mean now that the case is dropped? Join us tonight on Capitol Report at 7 p.m. Eastern to hear the key takeaways and legal analysis. And the special counsel's report on Hunter Biden is now public. In it, special counsel David Weiss defends his decision to prosecute President Biden's son. Here are the details.
My name is David Weiss.
Special counsel David Weiss called President Biden's opinion on the cases against his son Hunter gratuitous and wrong. The report covers Weiss's multi-year investigation into Hunter Biden. He brought charges against the younger Biden for lying about his drug use when buying a gun in 2018 and for evading almost $1.5 million in taxes. In the introduction to his report, Weiss says he obtained convictions in both cases. A jury found Hunter Biden guilty on the gun charges, and Hunter Biden later pleaded guilty to the tax charges. But before he could be sentenced, Hunter Biden was granted a presidential pardon by his father, the president. At the time, Joe Biden described the prosecution of his son as unfair and politically motivated. In a December 1st statement, he wrote, "No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion that Hunter was singled out only because he is my son." Weiss notes how President Biden changed tracks after previously saying he would not pardon his son.
And I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Weiss argues the president protested the investigation only after Hunter Biden's guilt had been fully established. In his report, Weiss says other presidents have pardoned their family members, but none have maligned public servants in the process. Hunter Biden's lawyers have repeatedly alleged that political pressure pushed Weiss into pursuing indictments instead of negotiating plea deals. They argued federal prosecutors ordinarily would not have pursued cases like Hunter Biden's. In his report, Weiss says Hunter Biden's legal team failed to show any evidence for this. Weiss writes, "I prosecuted the two cases against Mr. Biden because he broke the law." The White House has not responded to a request for comment.
With the Eaton fire destroying thousands of acres, the community is rallying to support those impacted by the devastation. NTD's Christina Corona brings us the latest from Pasadena at one of the donation centers.
We're here in the city of Pasadena, where the Eaton fire has scorched over 14,000 acres, just about a mile up from where we're from. We're here at the Pasadena Job Center, which has turned into a donation center where hundreds of people are donating their time, getting donations to those who are in need that were infected by the fire. As you can see behind me, it is extremely busy here today. Many cars are lined up, getting anything from food, water, baby food, all the essentials that they may need. Volunteers are also working tirelessly, going through neighborhoods to clear brush and fallen trees in an effort to improve conditions for residents who may return to their homes in the coming days. We spoke with the workers' rights director, who shared that while they are overwhelmed with clothing donations, there is an urgent need for several other essential items.
Things like baby formula, diapers, more water, more energy drinks, and really good dry goods, dry beans, pasta, and non-perishable food is super useful for the community right now. We are also accepting volunteers. Thousands of volunteers from around LA have come.
Just across the street, a beautiful vigil is being set up to honor those who lost their lives in the fire. Roberto Marquez, determined to secure the perfect spot, arrived as early as 4 a.m., wanting to remind the community never to forget those who are gone.
Today I'm working on setting up the memorial, which is very important for all those families that lost their loved ones.
Roberto made 24 crosses to honor the confirmed deaths, but he also brought extras, hoping they won't be needed, yet prepared in case more lives must be mourned.
Then we have a vigil this Saturday, the 18th. It's 6 p.m., so everyone is invited to come and unite.
We're on Lake Avenue and Via Street. It is just so nice to see the community coming together during this difficult time. Reporting from the city of Pasadena, Christina Corona, NTD News.
The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power is facing a new lawsuit. Residents accuse it of failing to properly manage water supplies needed to fight the deadly Palisades fire. The complaint says the department should have maintained water in a nearby reservoir, which was dry when the flames erupted. Governor Gavin Newsom on Friday called for an investigation into reports about firefighting water issues. The LA Department of Water and Power did not immediately respond to media requests for comment. And Southern California Edison is facing multiple lawsuits. Some are alleging its equipment sparked the deadly Eaton fire in Pasadena. Eyewitness videos reportedly show flames at the base of an Edison transmission tower before powerful winds spread the fire. Edison's CEO says the company is investigating, but hadn't found any electrical problems around the time the fire broke out. The Kremlin says it supports a meeting between President-elect Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin. This as Trump is set to take office in less than a week. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the latest on the Ukraine war, starting with an update on the battlefield situation.
Footage appears to show an oil depot in Russia on fire on Tuesday. The governor of Russia's Saratov region says the area has been subjected to a mass drone attack. Officials report damage to 2 industrial sites. Russia's military, meanwhile, releasing this video on Tuesday. It appears to show airstrikes and a Russian flag waving in a Ukrainian village. Russia reports taking control of 2 settlements in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. Also on Tuesday, in Moscow, Russia's foreign minister talked about a possible meeting between President-elect Trump and President Vladimir Putin.
President Putin said many times that he is ready to meet, but there have been no such proposals so far. I think we should meet. But first, there is a need for Trump to take up office.
He added that Trump recognizes the realities on the ground in Russia and Ukraine. And in Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was asked about possibly lowering the draft age for the military. However, he says the military needs more weapons first.
Our brigades are not supplied with enough equipment as of today. Our people need to be protected. Well, not just protected, but they need to have according weapons and knowledge.
Zelensky says Ukraine's allies should supply more weapons before Ukraine can consider lowering the draft age. Just last week, the US announced an additional $500 million in military aid for Ukraine. Trump suggested he'll most likely send much less aid once he takes office next week. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The Houthi terrorist group in Yemen continues to launch missiles at Israel, forcing residents to seek shelter. Meanwhile, families of hostages shared details of the ceasefire proposal after speaking with Israel's prime minister. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
Part of a large missile landed on a house near Jerusalem on Tuesday. It was reportedly fired by the Iran-backed Houthi terrorist group in Yemen and was intercepted by the Israeli Air Force.
Significant fragments from the interception struck the building behind us, penetrated the roof tiles, but were stopped by the ceiling of the protected space, which demonstrates that the Homefront Command's guidelines to enter protected spaces saves lives.
No injuries were reported from the attack. Sirens also sounded in Tel Aviv on Tuesday, and residents took cover there as well. Israeli forces said that after several attempts, they likely intercepted the missile which was fired from Yemen. No injuries were reported there as well. The Houthis said they had fired 3 missiles at Israel within a 12-hour time span. In another development, an official from Qatar, which has been mediating the ceasefire talks, said a draft of the agreement was given to Israel and Hamas. Secretary of State Antony Blinken chimed in on the situation.
The ball is now in Hamas's court. If Hamas accepts, the deal is ready to be concluded and implemented. I believe we will get a ceasefire.
Meanwhile, family members of hostages met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday, and they said that an agreement to release all of the hostages had not yet been reached.
We are demanding from Prime Minister Netanyahu, from Qatar, from President-elect Trump to agree upon all the stages of negotiation and get all the hostages back. We don't want more hostages left behind.
The Prime Minister, unfortunately, is moving forward with a deal that does not include my son and 65 additional hostages, where it is not known how my son is going to come out. And for most of the families, this deal is unacceptable. There needs to be a phased deal where we know that all the hostages come out.
Residents in the Gaza Strip are also ready for a ceasefire.
Enough with the destruction, death, destruction of homes. Enough with these tragedies we are living in. We want to go to our homes to end this war.
One of the residents here in Khan Yunis said an Israeli airstrike killed his 2-week-old niece, who had not yet been named. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up with the presidential inauguration less than a week away, Chris Beers reports on the historic significance of this event for Americans and people across the globe. The U.S. is coming out with a new rule banning Chinese software and hardware in connected vehicles or smart cars. Jason Blair explains the significance of the move. 2 British Labour politicians call for a national inquiry into the UK's grooming gang scandal, putting pressure on the British Prime Minister to commission an investigation. Welcome Hudson brings us more from London when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The peaceful transfer of power in the U.S. takes place once again less than a week from today. But what makes this event so special for Americans and onlookers across the globe? NTD's Chris Beers spoke with political historian Jeff Bloodworth of Gannon University about the significance of Inauguration Day.
The first U.S. presidential inauguration took place over 230 years ago when George Washington was sworn in on April 30th, 1789. Arguably more important was the inauguration of John Adams in 1797. It represented America's first peaceful transfer of power from one group of leaders to another with differing views on important issues. It also set a precedent not only for the United States, but also for the world.
In the history of the world, executive power, whether they're kings or emperors, is generally done by force. And what was so remarkable about the United States is that the peaceful transition of power is a tradition. And the U.S. making that into a normal part of our political life, I mean, this is unprecedented in the history of the world.
Political historian Jeff Bloodworth says in world history, peaceful transitions aren't unique to the United States, but the fact that it's become a commonplace part of American society is.
And it's something that Americans are rightfully proud of. This is why there's so much pomp and circumstance that have grown around the inauguration of a new president and presidential administration.
The peaceful transition of power has become more commonplace around the world since President Washington took the oath of office.
The founding fathers of the American Revolution, I mean, their stated aim was to make the world anew, and, right? To have the world mimic the United States. And in that way, where the peaceful transfer of power has become more normal across the world, this is, making the founders prophetic.
Monday will mark the 60th U.S. presidential inauguration. Today, the procedure has become so normal, we almost don't even notice it.
This is the heritage of the American Revolution and its reverberations, which are still ongoing. It's not only the United States that makes the peaceful transfer of power more of an international norm, but the U.S. plays a significant role in making that a norm and an expectation across the world.
The peaceful transition of power is all the more significant when the U.S. is divided politically. I asked Bloodworth to compare the circumstances surrounding this year's inauguration of President-elect Trump with his inauguration 8 years ago.
In the almost decade since Donald Trump was first inaugurated, America has lived almost a century of events. It has been jam-packed and dramatic, and I think a lot of people are, understandably somewhat exhausted.
Trump's 2016 win surprised America, and no one knew what to expect. His prospects looked better in 2024, and people today have some sense of what to expect from his second term.
I think we understand that, Donald Trump as president is going to behave as Donald Trump, the candidate, and it's going to, we're going to have to put our seatbelts on, and we're going to go for a roller coaster ride, and there's going to be a lot of events that are going to be coming at us from many unexpected quarters.
Bloodworth says the key difference between Trump's first inauguration and his second is people's perception of his legitimacy. In 2016, he lost the popular vote amid allegations he colluded with Russia to secure the win. This time, he won both the Electoral College and the popular vote, as well as all 7 key battleground states. Chris Beers, NTD News.
The Biden administration announces new restrictions on car parts and software from China and Russia. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
The White House says that President Biden is taking decisive action to protect the U.S. by banning the sale or imports of smart cars, as well as vehicle hardware and software with links to Russia and China. A statement says the Biden administration is committed to ensuring that our automotive supply chains are resilient and secure from foreign adversaries' cyber threats. The move comes after a year-long examination, according to the statement. The White House says foreign adversary involvement in the supply chains of connected vehicles poses a significant threat in most cars on the road today, granting malign actors unfettered access to these connected systems and the data they collect. The regulation also applies to entities that are owned, controlled, or subject to the direction of the CCP or Russia, even if those vehicles are made in the United States. According to the statement, these restrictions will take effect for 2027 car models for software and 2030 models for hardware. The White House says these restrictions will also help the United States defend against the Chinese Communist Party's cyber espionage and intrusion operations. The statement says these attacks continue to pose a, quote, significant threat to U.S. critical infrastructure and public safety. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Turning now to the grooming gang scandal in the UK, 2 British Labour politicians called on their government to implement a national inquiry. This puts additional pressure on the British Prime Minister. The renewed focus on the scandal comes after Elon Musk attacked the British government over the issue. Here's more from NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson in London.
The two Labour Party politicians for both Rotherham and Rochdale have called on the British Labour government to begin a nationwide inquiry into grooming gangs. Now, these two towns are at the heart of the scandal, where, according to a 2014 report, gangs of predominantly Pakistani heritage men groomed young white girls for decades. Their calls add mounting pressure on the British government for a more comprehensive investigation. Responding to these latest calls, British Security Minister Dan Jarvis told the BBC the government wants to act now and implement past recommendations rather than hold new inquiries.
Fundamentally, we need to get on and actually deliver the justice that these victims deserve. And we think the best and most timely way to do that is to do the work that the previous government weren't able to do, of implementing the findings of Professor Alexis Jay's report. We think that is the best way to deliver for victims and ensure that those who've committed these crimes are held to account for them.
The nearly 500-page Jay report, however, only mentioned Rotherham once. Labour MP for Rotherham, Sarah Champion, said child abuse in the UK is endemic as she called for a national inquiry. She said purely local inquiries lack the power to compel witnesses to give evidence and failed to satisfy the public's concern over cover-ups. She proposed a national inquiry should also investigate the failings of authorities to tackle the grooming gangs. A 2014 report said the majority of known perpetrators in Rotherham were of Pakistani heritage, and that in some cases local officials and other agencies had been afraid of identifying their ethnic origins for fear of being seen as racist. The report made a conservative estimate that more than 1,400 girls were sexually exploited in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013. Champion is the third Labour MP to call for a nationwide inquiry. Pressure has mounted on Prime Minister Keir Starmer ever since Tesla owner Elon Musk brought the issue into focus at the start of the year. Musk on Monday said on X, "The pressure will keep building. The British public deserves answers, not cover-ups." Reform UK party leader Nigel Farage has reiterated a commitment to hold his own inquiry if Starmer does not do so.
And if Starmer won't do it, and I'll give him to the end of the month, if Starmer won't do it, I will raise the money and we will hold that full public inquiry. We will do it.
The British government said that a national inquiry would take too long and that they prefer to act soon. But they also said that Champion's views carry weight, so this suggests that they could be willing to change their mind. But for now, that remains to be seen. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Coming up, senators scrutinize President-elect Trump's pick for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. A former White House Deputy National Security Advisor joins us to react to the confirmation hearing. And New York Governor Kathy Hochul delivering her State of the State address today. Chris Baugh brings us the highlights from Albany, including what the governor promises to do about subway safety after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. California officials warn that new wildfires are still possible in the next 24 hours, given the strong winds and dry conditions. An additional 84,000 people could be ordered to evacuate, and 94,000 are still without power. President-elect Trump announced plans to create a new agency called the External Revenue Service to collect tariffs and other revenues from foreign nations. Meanwhile, the Justice Department released Special Counsel Jack Smith's report on Trump, which alleges that Trump engaged in, quote, criminal effort to overturn the 2020 election. Mediators presented a draft agreement for a ceasefire and hostage release deal to Israel and the Hamas terrorist group. The deal would begin with the release of 33 hostages over a 6-week period and involve the withdrawal of Israeli forces from population centers. Russia said Ukraine fired U.S. ballistic missiles and UK cruise missiles at Russian regions and launched one of the biggest drone attacks to date. Russia's military said it would retaliate. The Senate Armed Services Committee held a confirmation hearing for Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Senators questioned him on allegations of misconduct and his view on women in combat roles. Joining us now to react to Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing is Stephen Yates, Senior Research Fellow on China and National Security Policy at the Heritage Foundation and former Deputy National Security Advisor at the White House. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, Pete Hegseth was the first of Trump's cabinet picks to go through his confirmation hearing today. What did you make of the hearing, and how likely is it he will be confirmed?
Well, it was definitely a high-stakes maiden voyage for testing the new normal in Washington after the election, and also having the first of President Trump's nominees step right into the limelight. This was much more political theater and warfare, a little less discussion of policy, but there were some substantive things that came through. The focus on mission, making sure that our force is lethal and focused on the right kind of priorities, getting away from what the secretary-designate had identified as some distractions on priorities. But the Democrats were basically throwing a lot of personal challenges towards him. But I think fundamentally the challenge was, could he even get a word in? Some of these questions went on for 6 or 7 minutes, asked for a yes or no, and time was up.
I want to expand on that because the Senate Armed Services Committee is usually one of the least partisan on the Hill. Its members today split on party lines, with Democrats questioning allegations of sexual misconduct and his past comments when it comes to women in the military. Now, Hegseth in his opening comments saying if confirmed, he would reestablish deterrence, rebuild our military, and restore the warrior ethos. What do you see as Hegseth's strengths and weaknesses he'd be bringing to this role?
Well, the first strength is getting through confirmation. I think that his time in television and public life, I think substantively helped him in that. I mean, he kept his body language and his demeanor very cool through an absolute onslaught that I would have had raised eyebrows. My face would have turned red. Who knows what others of us might have said under that kind of heat. He kept his cool, and I think that was kind of clearing the first hurdle. But going into the Pentagon upon confirmation is a huge challenge. Anyone would, but these circumstances are enormous. We have to reform the defense manufacturing supply chain in major and fundamental ways. There are enormous vested interests that will fight that. So it'll take political capital, it'll take communication savvy, will need the help of the president and maybe some of his top supporters, whether it's Mr. Musk or others that step in and say, here are some of the things that have to do with the engineering and regulatory issues to make things efficient, but also some political muscle. This is going to be, I think, a very, very high stakes tenure for him. But I think the warrior ethos, being the secretary for the warrior, I think that is a course correction where we've had kind of bureaucrats in uniform in some cases at the top that were leading the national deterrent into, I think, dangerous territory.
And it's not just the domestic or bureaucratic. We also have the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, Europe, Russia, and Ukraine, rising tensions in Asia. What do you see Hegseth bringing as defense secretary if he's confirmed to all of that?
Well, first, I think it matters a great deal that we get home with all these things inside the Pentagon and inside the government. To have revival, renewal in America, it makes us a more credible partner and power. It makes the options we have to contain and deter and maybe even at times confuse the non-status quo powers or our enemies in different regions. It makes those options a lot safer and more likely to succeed. So I think when it comes to his immediate challenge, is going to have to try to make sure that we're delivering the material that has been promised to allies that are under threat. That would include some arms sales to Taiwan that were supposed to be delivered in 2023 and are still awaiting delivery, even though they've been paid for. When it comes to the commitment to Israel and replenishing supplies after that conflict has gone on longer than I think people had hoped, and then readjustment to what our relationship is going to be with NATO, I think is just a continuing evolution of the conversation that began in Trump 1.0. And I think that we've got some new allies in that conversation in other parts of Europe that recognize they want to step up too.
And how do you think adversarial countries like China would view someone like Hegseth? Can he achieve that deterrence that he's speaking of?
He can, but he does not have to step into that role in the sense that it is all about the commander in chief and his command presence with his counterparts in these other countries. President Trump will open up to dialogue in several areas of the world. That doesn't mean concession. It means taking temperature, maybe trying to influence and shape things before having to engage in tough competitive talks or demonstrations of deterrent. And so I think that it's really going to be the Trump administration, and Pete's job is, as secretary, is going to be to really revive morale and revive the substantive strategic weight of the Pentagon. Sure, there'll be dialogue with counterparts. Will remain to be seen whether we have military to military dialogue with China. It's not something I think is necessary. I think we speak much louder with our actions in support for our allies than those one-to-one conversations have bilaterally. But those will definitely be high on the list of making sure we have detection, deterrent, and I think a resilient force that is a good partner and ally.
Stephen Yates, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
New York's State of the State took place today in Albany. Governor Kathy Hochul outlined her plan to make New York's future safer and more affordable. NTD's Chris Bobb was there.
I know our work is not done. Worries about crime, struggles to make ends meet are far too common. Our state has to be livable, and the people here have to be afforded to live in it.
This afternoon, Governor Hochul began her speech with a call back to her youth in the 1970s. She said in the 70s, inflation was high, crime was up, and New Yorkers shouldn't have to live under that again. So she's pushing an affordability agenda. Basically, New York has to be livable, and New Yorkers have to be able to afford to live in it. So she outlined a number of policies which she says will help New Yorkers afford living in the state. The first issue is a direct payment for families making under $300,000 a year. She's giving them $500. For singles making under $150,000 a year, they're getting $300. All of this is coming from excess sales tax revenue brought on by inflation. Another issue is child care and the cost of raising a child. Governor Hochul said she's going to give a $1,000 tax credit to families with children under 4 years of age. Other issues that the governor talked about, crime, mental health, transportation, housing.
That's why New York will do something no other state has done before and ban private equity companies from bidding on properties for the first 75 days that they're on the market. Recap, this is the game plan. More police where they're needed, safety infrastructure, and critical interventions to help the homeless and mentally ill get the help they need instead of languishing on trains and frightening fellow commuters. I say this because enough is enough. The chaos must end now.
All of these issues were well received by those around me. We have some comments by a Democrat and a Republican in the New York State Senate and Assembly. Take a look.
Glad that she is prioritizing public safety. For the entire Asian community, we have felt the need for increased efforts and funding towards public safety, especially with the rise in anti-Asian hate. So I'm glad to see that that is going to be a priority in this year's budget. We absolutely need to get more funding towards public transportation so that our subways are safer, so our streets are safer. So I'm really optimistic that both the legislature and the governor are going to make this a priority for the state budget and for the legislative session.
As a Republican, I was encouraged to hear that she acknowledges that we do have a crime problem. We do have an affordability problem. We do have an issue with the illegal immigrants that are here in New York, and we do have a tax problem.
The governor said the chaos must end. She was talking about committing people who are violently mentally ill. She talked about cleaning up the subways. Do you think Republicans and Democrats are going to be able to pass this legislation?
I hope we pass some legislation. We have people out on the streets that represent a constant and chronic threat to themselves and to their neighbors, to all of us. And that is not a situation that we can afford to ignore. People who are in that condition, they need help. And we need to protect ourselves and them from that danger, which is mental illness. So, shame on us if we can't do something about it.
So no ill words there from the Senate Deputy Minority Leader. But Governor Hochul's political future is unknown. There was a recent poll out by Siena that said that only 33% of New Yorkers would like to see her elected. The New York State Senate and Assembly have yet to pass a budget. When they do, we're going to see how many of these policies go into effect. From Albany, New York, I'm Chris Bobb for NTD.
Coming up, Shen Performing Arts is back in Florida, performing on stage in Miami, showcasing 5,000 years of traditional Chinese culture. Hear what the audience members say about their experiences. And in golf news, Tiger Woods plays tonight and makes his debut in the virtual golf league he co-founded. Will his surgically repaired back hold up? Dave Martin reports after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Shen Performing Arts took the stage in Miami, Florida over the weekend. NTD is a proud media sponsor of Shen and was in Miami. Here's what audience members had to say after the performance.
Shen Performing Arts concluded 3 performances at the Adrian Arsh Center for the Performing Arts in Miami, Florida on January 11th and 12th. Audience members got a glimpse of China's 5,000 years of traditional culture and values from before communism, a culture believed to be inspired by the divine.
Every aspect of it was an amazing portrayal of excellence. I like the fact that there are things that pertain to truthfulness, part of one of the core values that really resonates with us in the Western Hemisphere. And we like that truthfulness is an antidote against communism. The level of professionalism, the ballet, the expertise, the flexibility, you can see that it's second to none.
And I think it's a great message for everyone because it's a message, like a spiritual awakening for everybody, that kindness, human kindness still exists, and that's the path that we should take as human beings.
Shen travels with a live orchestra that blends traditional Chinese instruments with Western instruments. Theatergoers were deeply impressed and praised Shen highly.
The music was fantastic. You mix that with the visual components. And the energy was just incredible, the musicianship, it was beautiful, just beautiful.
It's very healing, very meditative. The orchestra, it's amazing, and the quality of the dance, the technique, and how precise they are, and the precision, it's very spot on.
The sound was so blended and smooth. It's very well synchronized with all the moves. It's amazing how from the orchestra pit they can know exactly to the second of what's coming, what's happening.
I love the production, the whole interaction between the virtual, how they jumped in the screen and back out, and also the costumes were beautiful. I definitely recommend it, so definitely go out if you have a chance. Check it out. It's a beautiful show. You're definitely going to enjoy it.
Shen will be performing at the Yuki Theater in Lakeland, Florida on January 14th and 15th. NTD News, Miami, Florida.
Tiger Woods makes his much-anticipated debut tonight in the newly formed TGL Virtual Golf League as a member of the Jupiter Links Golf Club. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
Woods' team will take on the Los Angeles Golf Club as both teams make their TGL debut. Last week's inaugural TGL match drew a TV audience of nearly 1 million viewers. TGL combines virtual golf with real golf across 15 custom-designed holes using alternate shot team play as well as one-on-one competition. In addition, players are mic'd up during the event, which provided entertaining banter during last week's match. Meanwhile, Woods, who's also a co-founder of TGL, played in last month's PNC Championship after taking several months off following back surgery in September. The 15-time major champion played in all 4 majors in 2024, though he missed the cut at 3 of them and finished last at the Masters. The only other event he played in was the Genesis Invitational in February, but had to withdraw, citing illness. Tonight's match starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Time and will be shown on ESPN. Elsewhere in sports, Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones talked with Colorado head coach and former Cowboy star Deion Sanders about their head coaching vacancy, according to multiple reports. Sanders is coming off a 9-win season at Colorado, the school's most wins since 2016. The Hall of Fame defensive back has posted a 13-12 record overall in 2 seasons with the Buffaloes, following a 3-year stint as head coach of Jacksonville State. Sanders played 14 seasons in the NFL, including 5 with the Dallas Cowboys. The defensive back earned 8 Pro Bowl selection and was named an All-Pro 6 times, while winning a pair of Super Bowls, including one with Dallas. The Cowboys announced Monday that they were parting ways with head coach Mike McCarthy after a 5-year run. And on Capitol Hill Tuesday, the House voted to pass a bill that would ban transgender athletes from women's and girls' sports at federally funded schools. The bill, entitled Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, would prohibit transgender athletes from playing on female sports teams. The vote passed by a 218 to 206 margin and was mostly along party lines, with 2 Democrats voting in favor and 1 voting present. The bill is expected to be taken up by the GOP-controlled Senate, where Republicans will need at least 7 Democrats to vote with the 53 Republicans to reach the 60-vote threshold needed. The men and women's sports issue has come to the forefront in recent years, with transgender swimmer Leah Thomas, formerly known as Will, winning an NCAA championship in 2022 with Penn. This is Dave Martin for NTD TV.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.